But there was nothing that I could have or my parents could have done to protect her from someone like you.
Northwest Ohio full of stories that no one will ever forget. That list includes the brutal murder of a University of Toledo nursing student that took place nearly 30 years ago.
A university police officer kidnapped the 19-year-old woman, handcuffed her, and gunned her down without reason. Tonight, Melissa Herstrum's family and friends want her killer to stay locked up. But Jeffrey Hodge is up for parole next week.
And tonight, Michael Tater digging through 3 decades of this case, uncovering parts of the story that have never been heard before. Michael?
That's right, Jeff. Melissa, I am standing at the Scott Park campus where Hodge took Melissa on that frigid January night in 1992. He put her on her knees, fresh snow still on the ground, and put 14 shots into her head, back, and neck. That's the story that most of us already know. But 24 hours before that happened, Hodge stopped another UT student over at the main campus, and she believes there's only one reason that she's alive today to tell her story. So this was the exact spot where you were.
This was the spot.
Almost 30 years ago. What lasted just 2 or 3 minutes has stuck with Anna Collin her entire life. She lived on campus at Parks Tower as a UT student back in 1992. That's where University Police Officer Jeffrey Hodge stopped her at 2:30 on the morning of January 26th.
We'll always remember it. I was pulled in. It was the second parking space, directly in front of the tennis courts, because when he pulled in directly behind me and blocked me in.
Colin rolled down her window slightly and asked Officer Hodge what she had done. She says he had just kept asking her where she had been. She told him she was with her boyfriend at a local bar and music venue called Frankie's, and he was coming to pick her up to go get breakfast. Colin remembers the interaction was very uncomfortable. She doesn't remember doing anything wrong and knows she was right because of what happened next when her boyfriend showed up.
By the time that he actually parked his car, the police officer had gotten back into his vehicle and taken off very quickly.
The very next night, Toledo police say Hodge pulled over 19-year-old Melissa Herstrum for an alleged traffic violation. She didn't have her ID, so Hodge offered to drive her to her apartment. But instead, he drove her to the Scott Park campus and murdered her.
It just was so raw and horrific. We just couldn't believe it.
Heidi Goebel-Becker-Goodwin was also a nursing student at the time. She and Melissa were sorority sisters at Pi Beta Phi. The Greek House held a memorial service for Melissa before police found her body, and Hodge was there.
He came over to the sorority house trying to console us, when all along he knew he had committed this heinous, horrific, aggravated crime.
Almost 30 years later, she's now a nurse and a mother, a chance Melissa never got.
He took so many things when he made that choice in January, and that has stayed with me my whole life.
This was a crime committed by someone who was supposed to be protecting kids on the campus.
Attorney Peter Weinberger represented the Herstrum family in the civil lawsuits against Hodge and the University of Toledo. He took Hodge's testimony in prison and remembers the admitted killer showed no remorse and claimed he had blacked out and couldn't remember killing Melissa.
I certainly remember absolutely no expression of remorse for what had happened. And that really struck me that, here was somebody who was doing time, who had pled guilty.
Colin still lives and works close to the university, but when she heard Hodge would be up for parole, her heart sank. She knows in her heart it could have been her and not Melissa. And she thinks about that every day.
Seeing his face pop up in that mugshot of Jeffrey Hodge, that was probably the moment that scared me the most, when I realized how close I had actually come to potentially losing my life that night.
Melissa's friends and family started a website asking others to write letters or emails to the parole board to keep Hodge behind bars, something Colin says should not even be up for debate.
This person who arbitrarily chose her to die that night, that he could then potentially be released. That to me is the more frightening thing.
Goebel-Becker-Goodwin has told this story to her children. Her oldest, now in college, wrote a letter to the board this year, someone who never knew Melissa, asking for Hodge to remain in prison. She and Colin both hope anyone who knew the fear and pain he caused comes forward to do the same.
The best legacy to Melissa is to continue to fight for justice for her by keeping Jeffrey Hodges in prison for the rest of his life.
That they'll listen to the family and understand that the need for keeping him where he is. I sincerely hope that they listen.
Now, Hodges' parole hearing is scheduled for next week, either on Tuesday or Wednesday. I have a full article posted on WTOL.com with information on how to write to the parole board if you wish. I did reach out and request an interview from Hodge, but never heard back. Jeff, Melissa?
Hey, Michael, I've got a question for you. I noticed you mentioned that Hodge told investigators he just sort of blacked out, didn't remember anything about that night, but he's also the one who called to get police to find Melissa's body and then responded himself. And then he also pleaded guilty to killing her. So how is parole even an option?
Well, back in the 1990s, life without parole was actually not a sentencing option. The case against him actually wasn't a slam dunk and was based mostly on circumstantial evidence. So Hodges' defense team at the time negotiated a plea deal so that he could avoid the death penalty. Peter Weinberger, who represented the Herstrums and who you saw in my report, says that they never found the murder weapon. So the key piece of evidence that linked Hodge to Melissa's murder was Melissa's DNA, which was found on his handcuffs. But back in the 1990s, DNA evidence was not as common as it is today.
And there were some concerns about the scientific basis for the DNA testing. And so the prosecutors, as I understand it, made the decision, rather than going to trial, to allow him to plead.
And now Weinberger says that the parole board should take into the fact that over the past 30 years, Hodge has really not cooperated or helped investigators in any way to help solve more of this case. And he also has shown zero remorse to the family for what he did 30 years ago. And now, almost 30 years later, Hodge is up for early parole because of good behavior. Live in West Toledo tonight, Michael Tater, WTOL 11.